Hello everyone. Today I am creating a handmade watercolor birthday card for a family member, and I am walking through my entire process step by step from planning to painting. This card is made on 140 pound watercolor paper that comes pre-cut and folded. I paid a little extra for that because it saves me time and gives me a clean, professional looking edge. This is actually my first time using this specific paper, so we're going to see how it works. Whenever I make cards for people, I start by taping down the card just to a simple clipboard using painter's tape. This keeps the paper flat and creates a clean border when I work. The card itself becomes a small canvas, which is perfect for watercolor. I should mention that watercolor is still very new to me. I've only been painting with watercolor for about 6 to 9 months, and this is probably my 10th watercolor painting ever. So I'm still learning, experimenting, and making plenty of mistakes, and that's part of the fun, honestly. One tool that has helped me a lot is AI during the art planning stage. I use it to generate step-by-step instructions and color palette ideas. Usually I have to edit the colors based on what paints I have laying around. I don't use it to make the art for me, which I know that AI has the capability to do. I use it as a learning tool. There are plenty of great watercolor tutorials on YouTube, but having the structured guidance just helps me a little bit more to stay focused. The first step is lightly sketching the scene. I'm planning a soft landscape with rolling hills. So I'll have some background hills, mid-ground hills, and then a foreground. And the foreground will eventually include some birch and pine trees. I'm using what I believe are waterproof graphite pencils. I'm not actually sure, so we'll find out shortly if they are. And that is part of the experimenting process. So I'm just sketching lightly those hills and then adding in the horizon. And the horizon line is below the hills. Nothing needs to be perfect on these paintings. Nature isn't perfectly straight, and neither is the sketch. For the background wash, I'm using Payne's Gray, heavily diluted with water. The goal is a very light atmospheric wash, not a dark color. Because I am new to watercolor painting, I'm actually going to test this wash on a piece of scrap paper before applying it to the card, especially just because this is a birthday card and it's not a practice piece. Once I'm happy with the dilution, I then apply the wash to the sky, and I create a darker wash for the very background hills. I then apply the rest of the whole paper with that lighter wash. While the watercolor is drying, I start a matching acrylic version of the same landscape. This is something I often do because acrylic is my stronger medium, and I actually normally paint acrylic landscapes first, and then I do a matching acrylic birthday card. And so this is definitely expanding my skill set. Planning the same scene in both the canvas and the card helps me to understand how to modify for different sizes, but now I'm going to be painting the same scene in both acrylic and watercolor to see how each of the media behave. For the acrylic painting, I am beginning with a warm base wash using titanium white and just a touch of yellow. And then I'm going to let that dry. I put the painting into another room with a ceiling fan, and it dried well enough to put the next layer on after about, I would say, 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. Watercolor really works best in layers. I found that by doing gentle washes over each of the layers, it adds a lot of depth to the color, and then it also adds more pigment to each layer, creating that darker and darker effect and that distance effect. So after the first wash dried, I used raw umber and yellow, and I watered them down again, just trying to get very, very light colored washes for the background, and that created an earthy tone. After it was done, my husband said it looked kind of like South Dakota, just the nice brown prairie. And for the foreground, I added just a hint of green to make it still that earthy color, but just a hint of green. As the watercolor dries, again, I'm going back to the acrylic canvas, and I'm adding in with white paint, I'm making the outline of those mountains again, because apparently my pencil was not waterproof, and I did end up smearing all of the lines. One of the things that many artists joke about is the happy little mistakes, and I actually like the dark gray lines that this created. It adds more depth and character into this acrylic painting. For the acrylic painting, I am making the sky using ultramarine blue and white. I am wrapping the paint around the edge of the canvas. For this particular painting, I am planning to frame it in such a way that the sides of the canvas will be visible. Next, I'm going to make the mountains that are in the far background using gray, and so gray is made from titanium white and Mars black. And then I use just a hint of blue so that it has a little bit of the sky in it. And as I make those mountains, I start adding in yellows and blues to add depth to those mountains and tie the colors together. Next, I'm going to cover the warm wash with a earthier version of that same yellow. So it's going to be quite a bit of white with a little bit of yellow, and then I'm just going to add a tiny bit of black to make it a little bit darker. I'm also adding in some grays and some light blues from the sky just to add some depth to the mountain range. Finally, I'm mixing up some of the green color, the same that was in the watercolor. I'm using this with, again, that same brownish color, so the white, the yellow, and a little bit of black, but now I'm going to add in little bits of blue also. And finally, I'm adding in those greens back into the earthy tan color of these middle ground hills. And then I do add both the earthy tan color and the green into the background gray hills. Back to the watercolor card. So once both the washes were dry, I started adding birch and pine trees. The birch trees are really tricky because they rely on light values for the tree trunk, and I've already used most of my white space. So instead, I am going to use a diluted gray, so that Payne's gray, along with raw umber, and just suggest tree trunks and let the watercolor texture create the bark naturally. I started with the birch trees and just very loosely added the impression of leaves on the birch trees. I used just some very watered down green, and then for the pine trees I wanted to very loosely suggest triangular shapes, so I did some very natural looking triangle shapes coming down from the tree trunks. Once I had the general shape of the pine trees, I made a darker green and went into the foreground and made those pine trees a little bit darker. So a little bit of Payne's gray with that green color to make that dark pine tree color. Next, I added a little bit of yellow to the green to make a lighter green color that's more in line with birch tree leaves, and went right on top of where the existing idea of birch tree leaves is, and kind of went around those leaves so that it has the different values of those light watered down leaves and then some of the yellower leaves. And then finally, after finishing off the last of the pine trees, I do make sure that the trees in the background, there's little stems and little trees in the back that allow us to give us that idea that there's trees all over these prairies or these plains. Finally, I signed my card and it is ready to send off to my family member, and I will be moving on to the acrylic side to finish that up also. I mixed some yellow and white and a little bit of the black, so very similar to the earthy color that's in the middle. I just added a little bit more red and a little bit of blue to that to make it a little bit more brown colored so that we could build some tree trunks. As I started recognizing that this looked like a scene from South Dakota or the Black Hills, I actually decided that I wanted to do more of the pine trees, paying homage to the ponderosa pines that belt me with pine cones every summer. And I went with a darker green, so just a very similar green to the grass. I just darkened it up with a little bit of black to make the pine needles. To add a little variety to these existing pine trees, I darkened up the green a little bit more black to it, and gave them a little bit more depth. With that same dark green, I added a horizon line and then added little stands of grass to the foreground. I noticed that there were a few spots in the foreground on the grass where the green didn't completely cover the yellow and the white in the background. And so I very lightly went over that with the same color brown as the tree trunks. For the rest of the video, I go through and I make sure that all of the little uneven patches of paint have maybe trees associated with them, and I'm just kind of picking and choosing from the greens and the tans, and I even have just straight black. I just dip into the paint colors that are already existing on this palette. So one of the nice things about using a very simple palette of colors, so I just had a red, a yellow, and a blue, and then black and white. Those three colors, because I'm using only those three colors, the colors blend really nicely together, and I'm not adding in other, for example, other blues or other reds that maybe throw off the color of the green or the blue. And so for that reason, I can just dip back into any of the same colors that I've already used, because they already have been blended together and they already look okay together, and it works really nicely for a painting like this. And that's just a strategy that I've picked up over the years. And that marks the end of my acrylic painting. If you liked the watercolor or the acrylic, please let me know in the comments, and let me know if you have any ideas, suggestions, anything that you have picked up over the years, or things that you would like to see more of. And please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Have a great day.